It's a new year, and you know what that means. It's time for rookies. All that and more when we return.
Welcome to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to college prospect evaluation with a fantasy football focus. With your hosts, John Arrington, Aaron Wilcox, and Andy Starr. This podcast brings you actionable strategies and player-driven analysis for your Devy, C2C, and Dynasty leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive into rookie season. Welcome into the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, John Arrington, joined as always by Andy Starr. And unfortunately, we do not have our good friend Aaron Wilcox with us tonight. He is doing dad duties, as we all know that he's going to be dealing with. So he's going to be here, not here, back again, gone again, all that kind of good stuff. But obviously, always here in our hearts. But this is the time of year where we spend the next 4 to 6 months talking about these rookies and nothing else. Obviously, right now, it's all anyone wants to talk about. It's all anyone wants to hear about. But we also know that in the very near future, it will be the last thing you want to hear because we will have talked about it so much. But at least we're here in this moment where we can all be excited about it. And I know Andy isn't as excited about this rookie class as I am. He's trying to pull me back down to earth. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely some reasons to be a little nervous, but there's some good players mixed in here as well. Let's check in with Andy, and then we will dive into some rookies.
Yeah, I was just looking at some of the players who are going to the Senior Bowl. You know, what are the options in this year? And we're going to talk about your mock draft that you did for DLF today in the first round. And like, yes, some of the receivers are fine. You know, the Jeremy Bernards of the world, but these are guys that I would be excited about in like the middle of the second in a typical draft. And now it's just like these are the guys who we're getting in the middle of the first this year. And we were talking before the show with, the quarterback situation here. We think Fernando Mendoza is going to come out because, he's basically the consensus 101 every mock draft you see. So let's just say he'll probably come out. But Dante Moore is not a lock, not saying that Dante Moore is even somebody that you should be excited about. And then after that, there's, who's the QB2 in this class? I kind of jokingly, half jokingly, but almost seriously said Diego Pavia. And that kind of just feels like where we're at right now with the level of talent. It's very, very top heavy at all three positions. If you want to get excited about any position at all, it might be the tight ends. And even them, it's not as exciting as it was last year. So there's just not a lot of cream at the top. There's the couple guys that you want to see, and then after that, it's just real watered down, which I'm not excited about it. I'll just be honest right now. I was a little more excited in the middle of the season, maybe even in the off season. I thought people were kind of sleeping on this 2026 class, but as it's played out now, and what we're seeing, some guys that I really like coming back to school. This is just the NIL transfer portal era we live in. It's really starting to look like one of the worst draft classes I've seen really since starting to play Dynasty fantasy football.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to tend to agree. I do think we're going to be saved, and I think I've said this before, in recent months, but I think we're going to be saved by the ambiguity of this draft class. And by that I mean, everyone seems to like a different player, dislike a different player, and so you don't know, you're going to go into your rookie drafts and you're not going to know. Whereas in previous years, it's like this guy goes at 101, this guy goes at 102, this guy goes at 103, and so on and so forth. And that's, it's almost like written in stone. Maybe it's like slightly just switched up in your leagues, but for the most part, it's like this guy isn't going to fall past 108 or this guy isn't going to fall past 202. Well, this year you might have a guy that goes at 109 in one league and goes at 209 in another league, and I think that's what going to be our saving grace is, even though there's not as many good players as we might normally want. And obviously there's still time for people to, for players to announce or declare for the NFL draft and all that. But we know that people are going to jump in on some of these landmines that we'll get into later on. Maybe like after we get into the draft, we can talk about some of the landmines that people are going to fall on, and they're going to save us, and they're going to let these other good players, get pushed down the board, and we're still going to be able to get some. So I'm looking at it the half glass or glass half full and optimistically and all that kind of stuff. But at least that's what I'm trying to do right now is to keep a smile on my face and not be like, what am I going to do with all these picks?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Just to throw that in real quick, like the ADP after the first round is going to be like Devy ADP. You and I are used to that, where it's just sort of like get your guy after that. I think that's like what it's going to look like in the second, third, and fourth round. People are just going to say, I'm going for this guy because he's the one that I like the most. Before we learned landing spots, before we learned anything else, because there's just not going to be a really strong consensus after the first 8 or 9 picks with this group of players.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's going to be the case, but we will get into that here in a minute. But if Andy was not here last week, but if he went back and listened, he would have known that there was a little surprise for Aaron, and he's not getting away without his surprise as well. So why don't we guess the guy? Let's guess the guy. Alrighty, so it's that time of year, like I said, it's the off season, so it's time for guess the guy, bring the games back, and we haven't come up with any new ones yet, so here we are doing guess the guy. I will give hints to Andy for anyone who doesn't know what that is. I will give hints to Andy. He has to guess the player that I am thinking of, and he gets a certain amount of points depending on which round of answer which round he answers it in, I should say. So we're gonna go ahead and start out with your random guess. Andy, guess the guy.
All right, we're gonna go random guess. Ian Strong. Is that the guy?
Oh my god! Oh man!
Let's go.
It's Ian Strong. Holy crap! Okay, yeah.
I kind of,
guess the guy.
Here's the thing. I watched last week, and it was Jace Brown, so I figured you were going to go on that same wavelength of wide receivers who we like, who entered the transfer portal this year. So I was like, oh, maybe he'll go for Ian Strong. So I cheated, but maybe it's your fault for not mixing it up a little bit.
Well, no. So here's the hilarious thing. I actually had a different player for guess the guy going into tonight, and then I was like, we just got done talking about him. You and I in our DMs. We just got done talking about Charlie Becker, and I was like, and so I was like, he's gonna be too topical. I think he's gonna be too much, too much on the mind. And I know you were like looking into his numbers and stuff. So I was like, I think that's actually gonna be too easy. And so I pivoted to Ian Strong at the last second, and it was Ian Strong.
I don't think I would have got Charlie Becker. That would have taken.
Well, I know you were asking about him and stuff, so I kind of assumed you were looking at his numbers and things. And I'm like, man, he might know the market share. The second I say the market share, and the second I say he's a sophomore, I don't know. Maybe I thought it through, or I didn't play the game right clearly, because you just got 6 points. No one's ever gotten anywhere close to that.
It skyrocketed me into first place in the year.
Hey, you needed it after last season, right?
Yeah.
Oh man. All right. Well, you got 6. I think it's 6 points, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, you got 6 points for guess the guy, Ian Strong. Well, that wasn't as much fun for me as I thought it was going to be, but let's talk about Ian Strong for a minute.
We could, or we could talk about Charlie Becker, but I'm fine talking about Ian Strong. I mean, I kind of said my piece on him when we were doing our predictions or one episode where I thought, maybe this would be a good year for Ian Strong to enter the transfer portal. As much as I like the guy, um, the season he had with coupled with some injuries, coupled with KJ Duff, kind of stepping in when he was out and carving in a bigger role. I was like, just despite Ian Strong still having a season that he improved upon, he's still hitting all the metrics I like as far as yards per route run and that sort of thing. I was like, let's get him in the portal this year because he's definitely not going to be a first round pick. He's probably fringe day two at this point based on what we saw this year. Day two would, that would be his A plus outcome based on what we saw this season. So get in the portal, get to a team. I don't know where has he even committed yet? I don't think he's picked a team yet. Maybe like an Alabama would be great. I know Hollywood Smothers just went there, who was another guy that we really like.
No, he
But
did. Ian Strong went to Cal with
oh,
JKS.
oh yes, we were talking about that with JKS. Okay,
Yeah.
so that could be good for both JKS and obviously Ian Strong. That's a program that's on the upswing. So, and I don't think he's got anyone to worry about as far as like wide receiver depth. Is Jacob DeJesus coming back? That the 5'7" slot receiver, whatever he is. But uh, yeah, I like Ian Strong. I think he's been great for Rutgers. He converted safety, so he's kind of just still pretty new to the position and is doing it in the Big Ten against these defenses. So I like him. I think another year in college is what he needed to hopefully elevate himself into that potentially day one conversation. I'm hopeful, but I'm not like predicting it or anything.
Well, of all the transfers that like last year we weren't overly excited about, like, oh, Eric Singleton's going to Auburn and stuff like that. I feel like, while we maybe don't think that JKS is the best QB that, out there or anything like that, I think that he is an exciting QB. He can make those big throws and things that we want to see from Ian Strong and that we really didn't get to see as much of this year. His name sounds kind of boring and everything, but you go look at him, watch him play football, and that guy is anything but boring. He is an exciting player and a big play waiting to happen. So I'm pretty excited about that one. I wanted to talk about him with being in the transfer portal. Maybe he was too topical, too much on the top of Andy's mind, but he wins his our first ever 6 point guess the guy. So why don't we dive into Debbie? Alrighty, I just finished writing a one QB 2026 mock draft, rookie mock draft, I should say, and it's gotten some pretty good feedback, some good responses and good comments and stuff on DLF, but it's behind the paywall. And guess what? We don't do paywalls here, so we're gonna go ahead and cover it on the podcast for you, for the listeners. You guys get the paid stuff for free. And I always put myself out there saying, like, I don't try to be consensus. I just try to put out who I think will be the best players. And I say in the article, because everyone does this things a little differently and everything, I say once I have my picks in order, I like to focus on drafting the best players, not the best values. So my mock draft will likely look different than your actual rookie drafts. So like I know this isn't going to be the order that your rookie draft goes in. This is the order that I personally would draft them in right now, January 6, 2026. Obviously, things are going to change. We're going to get combine times. We're going to get Senior Bowl bumps. We're going to get, draft capital. We're going to get landing spots, and that's going to change a lot. But I tend to stick to my guns, and I've been doing this for a long time. So hopefully, a lot will be the same. This time last year, I wrote this same exact article, although it was a 2 QB or super flex article, and I had Jackson Dart at 105, and I said, hey, Jackson Dart is going to be here when it's all said and done. That's what I believe. At the time, he was projected to be a third round draft pick in the NFL draft. He goes to the Senior Bowl, gets the Senior Bowl bump, gets drafted in the first round, and now we know he is a stud. So, not necessarily tooting my own horns, just saying, hey, there's a reason why I'm here, and I put a lot of work into this stuff. So why don't we cover this rookie mock, and then Andy can tell me, what he agrees with, what he disagrees with, all that kind of stuff. But we can't do that without going with the 101. And starting off the rip, we're going to go ahead and switch things up from what you would probably see or hear for a rookie mock that you've been listening to this week, this month, whatever. We're going with 101 Jordan Tyson, baby. Jordan Tyson out of Arizona State has been my 101 for about 2 years now. Nothing has really changed. I get there's slight injury concerns. I'm not overly concerned. They were all different injuries. They were pretty spread out over the course of a 4 year career. He had three injuries. One of them obviously major with the ACL, but then everything else was basically something he could come back from and be fine. So nothing that I'm overly concerned with, but I honestly truly believe Jordan Tyson has the most upside of any player in this draft. And I mean, maybe we can't say the safest because of the injury history, but is like the one true game changer I believe in this draft class. So he has to be my 101.
Yeah, I would agree. I think you, Aaron, and I were all on the same page that Tyson was the 101 coming into this season. And there's nothing that he did this season to make you that should make you change your mind. Of of course, other players had great seasons, but Tyson's building off of two really solid seasons. One amazing last year, where he went for 1,000 yards, took Arizona State to the playoff. Even though he got hurt and wasn't actually playing in those playoff games, he just had a stellar regular season. And then his freshman year at Colorado, I think is a season that probably a lot of people don't even know happened. But he still almost had 500 yards receiving as a true freshman, and he's never finished a season with under 2.3 yards per route run. He's got 2.7 yards per route run for his entire career, and that 2.0 mark is what I'm looking for. And he's done that every single season and had, you know, a freshman season with 400 yards, and then obviously the 1,000 yard season last year. This year would have been 1,000 yards if he stayed healthy. Even in his worst games this season, he's still a PPR monster. He's still getting 7 catches for 43 yards, 8 catches for 40 yards, and those are his down games. Obviously, he had a couple games cut short towards the end of the season where he only ran 6 routes, he only ran 17 routes, he wasn't playing the full game. But when he's out there for the full time, like, you're guaranteed 6 receptions, you're almost guaranteed a touchdown, and a lot of times you're seeing 100 yards as well. And he did that all year long. He had the stellar season last year. It was a little, backloaded with the production last year, second half of the season, but I think he was still kind of trying to find his place on the team at that point in time because he had missed an entire season prior to the 2024 season. But once he got going, like, there was no stopping him, and then he kept it rolling this season. So there's really nothing that's changed that should say, if you had Tyson as the 101 in the offseason, what can you point to that he's done this year that would make you change your mind, aside from saying he got injured again, which, that's obviously a concern. Some players just seem to have something, about them where they can't stay healthy, even though it's different injuries and whatnot. It's certainly something that you can take into consideration. But as far as playing on the field, he's definitely the best player in this draft.
And I definitely agree. I don't think his freshman season gets talked about enough. Like Andy was saying, there might be people that don't even realize that he actually played at Colorado. They think that he just kind of like redshirted his way through Arizona State and all of a sudden was a junior and was a stud. And it was like, no. The reason why I actually picked up on the reason why I thought that Jordan Tyson was going to be good was because of that freshman year. It's kind of unbelievable if you really think about it. They only threw for less than 2,100 yards as a team at Colorado that year. And as a true freshman who tore his ACL in week 9. So he only played 8 full games, if he even played 8 full games. Because once again, he was a true freshman. I'd have to go back and look. But in 8 full games, he led the team in receiving. And he had 470 yards. And one of the big things was, I think it was like 3 out of his last 4 games that freshman season, he had over 100 yards, and I remember being so excited about it. And then he tears his ACL, and everyone goes, that's kind of fluky. It's really like 3 games, and nothing else, beyond that. I'm not going to be overly excited about him. But I'm looking at it and just saying, like, they had no one. They had there was no good QBs. There was no one else there, and he was looking like a stud. He had 92 yards, 115 yards, and 137 yards, respectively, in his last 3 games. And those were against Oregon State, Arizona State, and Oregon that he played. And that's when I knew Jordan Tyson was a stud. But, looking at those numbers, looking at that market share, looking at all that kind of stuff, if he doesn't get hurt, I think people would have realized right away that he was a superstar. And, it got delayed. But here we are, Jordan Tyson 101. Now, I have a tier break after the 101. Like I said, that's my 101. There's no discussing it. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and call anyone an idiot if they take someone else over Jordan Tyson. I'm just saying I wouldn't do it. So, Jordan Tyson, tier break. Then I have 2 players. I have Jeremiah Love, who a lot of people would consider their 101. And then I have Carnell Tate. Tate is a player who has completely changed my mind over the course of the past 2 years. He went from a player that I was like, yeah, he's there. He could be something fine, in the NFL, to I think this year he actually took a step forward, showed that he could actually be an NFL player, a player that I'm excited to have on my dynasty rosters. And obviously, you're going to hear from every single pod, article, whatever, about Jeremiah Love, how he's the RB1 in the class. He's the most amazing thing they've ever seen, and this and that. And you know what? I'm not even truly arguing with it. He's my RB1 clear cut. There's no other RBs that I would even consider as RB1 in this class. That is clear cut. It's when you start comparing to previous classes where I start pumping the brakes. Kind of like we did with Daston Genty last year, where everyone started losing their mind about Genty, and we said, "Look, it's not that we don't like Genty. It's like, why are we talking about generational? Why are we comparing to Bijan? Why are we comparing to Saquon? Why are we doing these things?" And that's kind of where I am with Love. He's never really been a true workhorse. He's never surpassed 200 carries in a season, for at any point. He's definitely bigger than he used to be, and so size isn't necessarily a concern. But we've seen how these NFL teams look at these smaller guys, like your Jameer Gibbs, your Trevion Hendersons, like players like that, and they kind of say, "Hey, we can't give him a full workload." We really only have like the Dolphins giving Achan a full workload, and everyone else is kind of like, "Hey, let's split carries," and that works out with Jameer Gibbs because the dude's an absolute stud. I'm sorry. Jeremiah Love is not Jameer Gibbs. So, if anything, if I'm putting my stamp on it, I said that he's Trevion Henderson light. That's where I would put Jeremiah Love. And that's not really like discounting him or saying he's bad or anything like that. I just don't think he quite has some of the. I don't think he quite has the receiving profile of Henderson, and yet they might be like similar as rushers and things like that. So it's a little bit of a knock from Trevion Henderson, but once again, that does not mean that I think he's a bad player.
Sorry, I clicked the wrong tab. I was looking at his stats. But yeah, I do like Love, but I think everybody was a little bit like, "Ooh, what's going on with Love at the beginning of this season?" He kind of had a couple of, I won't say bad games, but like they were just like the game against Miami, he only had 33 yards. And I was like, okay, well,
Yeah.
that's just one game. And then Texas A&M, 94 yards and a touchdown, fine. But it wasn't until the USC game where he exploded for 228 yards where people are like, okay, this is the Love we remember from last year. And since that point, like he hasn't really taken his feet off the gas pedal. Like Boston College, Pitt, Syracuse. He's going for like 130 and 2 touchdowns in all these games. Um, and the big time run rate actually increased this season, largely in part because of that USC game where he had 6 runs of 15 yards or more on only 24 carries. And the receptions, I think they went down this year, but his yards per route run went up considerably. So, and this is with Jadarian Price in the backfield with him, who is another guy that I think is probably, you could argue, is the RB2 in this class, depending on what Justice Haynes does. Um, but I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing that both of them are so successful in that backfield. Because then you start to wonder, like, well, is it because the blocking schemes? Is this like an elite offensive line? Now, I don't think that that's the case, because some of those advanced metrics will correct for that, especially the big time run rate, where he is busting these long runs. And as a receiver, I have to look and see if he is more of like, because that was the difference for me between Travion Henderson and Ashton Genty last year. Everyone wanted to point to Ashton Genty's sophomore season where he caught like 60 balls or whatever it was. But I was always pointing out to people, well, all of those catches were behind the line of scrimmage, and for Travion Henderson, it was not the same. Like, he had a positive ADOT. And the same is true for Jeremiah Love, by the way. He has a 2.4 ADOT. So he's not just like a screen merchant, as I like to call them. So I think Travion Henderson light is probably a good way of putting it, but it's like very light. I think they're closer than what John's letting on. So I'm excited about Jeremiah Love. I don't think he's, generational. I wouldn't put him anywhere near like the Bijan level or anything like that, or Gibbs, who you brought up earlier, but certainly could be a guy that is highly successful in the right system in the NFL.
Yeah, and it's tough because when you're talking about the guy that basically the consensus have already convinced themselves he's the 101. Anytime you talk about him and you say anything that's not amazing, people just think you hate him, or it even kind of sounds like you hate him. And it's like, I don't hate him. He's my 102. I just don't think he's, generational or anything like that. You have a lot of people that say, oh, well, you got to take the running backs. You got to take the running backs in Dynasty. And I'm like, yeah, when it's the right guy. I get it. Gibbs was a tier 0 player for me. Bijan was a tier 0 player for me. Those guys, you take those guys before you take anyone else, unless there's a tier 0 wide receiver. Then you can go that route. There's no tier 0 wide receiver in this class. There's no tier 0 running back in this class, and so we don't have to worry about that. But you didn't really touch on Tate. How do you feel about him? Like I said, he's kind of just in my mind for the past couple of years has just kind of like been there, and I was never really overly excited about him. This year, I kind of changed my tune on that.
Yeah. Well, he was a guy this offseason that I was like cautiously optimistic about, because he wasn't hitting that 2.0 yards per route run level that I wanted to be at, but his market share looked good on teams that had first round talent like Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka last year. He still had over 700 yards receiving. So I felt like he could take that step forward once he got the role, and that's exactly what happened. Like, now this season, over 3 yards per route run, and had some really nice games along the way. I think he did whatever happened in the playoff game. Like, Miami figured him out, but I think a lot of that was just because Jeremiah Smith was getting so open for Ohio State in that game, that they didn't need to look to Carnell Tate as much as they had during the regular season. But overall, I mean, yeah, this really solid season. I don't think there's another. I do like Makai Lemon. I know we're gonna get to him, but at this point, I feel like Carnell Tate is probably the safer guy. But I do view them very similarly as far as like value in a draft. But I just think Carnell Tate has a better chance at becoming like a Jamar Chase or a Justin Jefferson. Not saying he will be. I just think he has a better chance to turn into that type of player than somebody like Makai Lemon does. But overall, you can't deny what happened this season. He's playing across from Jeremiah Smith, which I think offers some opportunities for anybody. But with their quarterback Julian Sayin, I think both of those receivers probably helped him along in his being a starter. Uh, but he's going to be a first round pick in the NFL draft. So here at 103, I think he's probably the safest bet. And this is a one QB draft, one QB league draft. So we're not even thinking about QBs at this point in time.
Right.
So skill position wise, there's really nobody else that I would feel comfortable with aside from Makai Lemon, who we're about to talk about here.
Yes, and Makai Lemon does come in at 104, but I have another tier break there in between 103 and 104. Once again, I kind of like what Andy was saying. Carnell Tate kind of feels like another guy that could be a wide receiver one on a team. I don't necessarily see that with Makai Lemon. And so that's where you start having other question marks and things. And it doesn't mean that Makai Lemon isn't talented. It doesn't mean that he, can't be a good player and have big games. It just it's not what you would normally expect your prototypical X receiver or whatever is going to be in the NFL. And sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't, but we have to look at the probability of a guy hitting like that and being a wide receiver one or a absolute stud. So I have my tier three, and that's upside and versatility tier. That's what I called it. And it's 104 Makai Lemon, 105 Elijah Surratt, 106 Kevin Concepcion or KC Concepcion, 107 Jeremy Bernard, and 108 Omar Cooper Jr. So we have two. I just realized that they put Old Miss in here for Elijah Surratt. I need to change that. I definitely did not put Old Miss, but don't know what happened there. So we have two players from Indiana in this same tier, but honestly, I've kind of fallen in love with both of them. Uh, I've kind of said my piece on Lemon, but I will say what I actually wrote in the article because I think it says it pretty well, at least how I feel about him. I said a puzzling prospect whose early careers saw him mostly in a gadget slot role, A dot under 10 yards. The latter half of 2025 showed greater versatility with his A dot peaking in three of his final four games, suggesting more intermediate or deep work. Despite this, he finished with a 71% slot rate and a less than ideal overall A dot for a wide receiver one prospect. While his athleticism and yak ability are strong, I struggle to project him as an NFL team's primary option. My comp is Lad McConkey, a solid pro who projects as a fantasy wide receiver two or wide receiver three from the slot.
Yeah, I think we went over this. We did a whole episode of Makai Lemon.
Yes, we did go over this.
My whole thing with him is that he's always been a yards per route run guy. He's been super efficient his entire career, whereas Carnell Tate didn't have that. And I caveated that with obviously who he was playing with. Makai Lemon really hasn't played with anyone really. I'm trying to think who's their wide receiver one last year. Uh, but
Makai Lemon,
yeah, so,
Jacoby
right.
Lane.
And
I mean, it's Deuce
yeah,
Robinson when he was a freshman.
yeah. So well, they came in together, him and Deuce
Yeah,
Robinson. So yeah, he had 760 yards. I think the other thing that excites me about him is that he can be used in special teams too. Now I'm not if somebody drafts him in the first round, and I don't think he's going to be returning a lot of punts. But he can do
yeah.
that. So they're going to scheme him up in a lot of space in a lot of different ways to get him in space. But he's an elite route runner. He's gonna be able to run downfield and get open that way too. So um, I think it was Aaron who comped him to Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think he's better, not better in the sense that he's going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown or JSN like that, but I think he's more of a downfield threat than Amon-Ra St. Brown is or ever will be. So I'm excited about him. I want to see him fall on a good team. I'm not really. He's always been hard for me to comp. Like analytically speaking, he is almost exactly the same as Jarvis Landry at LSU all those years ago. But obviously that he had Odell Beckham on the team, that sort of thing. But I think Mekhi Lemon is going to be good. He's going to be one of those slot receivers that actually could potentially be a wide receiver one for fantasy, like Amon Ra, like JSN. I just don't think he's going to be like a wide receiver two in fantasy like JSN, but he could certainly be like top 10. So if he gets into the right situation. So that's why I kind of view him in that same area as Carnell Tate. I certainly wouldn't put him in the same tier as all the guys that you just listed off. Like I like Omar Cooper. I kind of like Jeremy Bernard. I kind of like Casey Concepcion. But I've got Mekhi Lemon comfortably above all those guys, and even above Elijah Surratt too. Who is a guy that I like as well. But another, I don't want the Indiana receivers are kind of confusing to me, especially Surratt. He started at a smaller program. How much of it is just this Kurt Signetti offense that teams just haven't been able to figure out for whatever reason? I don't know, because obviously NFL teams are telling us that they like Fernando Mendoza enough as a quarterback to say that this isn't just some system that he's benefiting from. So as far as Surratt and Omar Cooper go, I'm fine with them in the first round in this draft, just because, as I was talking about earlier, there's not anyone else that I'm really excited about. Once you get past like Mekhi Lemon, these are guys that I would typically look at in like the second round of a normal rookie draft, but here they are in the first round. So I guess not excited is probably not the best way to put it, but not excited to be drafting them in the first round. But that's just the state of the wide receiver and all the skill positions where we're at right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's funny you're saying that about Jeremy Bernard. I kind of feel the same way. In fact, I said the boring but consistent receiver, and that's just kind of who he is. Like he doesn't feel sexy, so you don't want to be like, oh man, I love this guy. I can't wait to take him at 107. But yet he's just consistent. He's great projected draft capital, and he's just been a solid player while he's been at Alabama when he wasn't completely, just blocked by Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk over at Washington. Once he got over and was able to, actually like make a career for himself, he's actually just been a pretty consistent receiver. So I completely get it. It doesn't feel sexy. Casey Concepcion's been a complete roller coaster of a player that we've been kind of in and out and in and out and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I don't know, but I think he really did prove himself this year. And it's kind of tough to say that he didn't. I feel like we can almost completely get rid of any kind of gadgety takes that we might have had at any point, because he was just a completely different player this year. He was playing in the intermediate, he was playing in the deep routes, and I really think it was like a third year transformation that we do see from time to time with college players, and I think we saw that with Concepcion. And then the two Indiana receivers, it really, it kind of blows my mind, but they use them so weirdly. One year they had Surratt in the slot and Cooper outside, and then the next year they switched them, and so like you look like their A dots completely switched, they're flipped, they're from year to year, their yards per reception completely switched from year to year. You would see Elijah Surratt in 2024, he was a big play threat, 18.1 yards per reception on 53 catches. In 2025, his yards per reception dropped to 13.2 on 55 catches, but then he gets 13 touchdowns. So his red zone efficiency skyrockets. And it's just the way they were using him. But, the way, as confusing as that might be, the way I look at it is these are versatile players, both of them. Omar Cooper Jr. and Elijah Surratt. They're both versatile players that can be used different ways, and teams are going to love that. They're not going to be locked into one role. Oh, you play left wide receiver and you just run straight, you just run goes or whatever it might be. I don't think they're going to be locked into anything, and that's why I really like them here.
Yeah, I think I like Cooper a little bit more than Surratt, honestly. He's a guy that's been super efficient at Indiana for 3 years. So playing against the Big Ten defenses, where Surratt had to come up from wherever the heck it was, UAB, or I don't even remember. But
He moved up twice. He came from like FCS
right,
to to like G5 and then G5 to or was it was James Madison, right? And then James Madison to Indiana.
yeah. And Cooper, he, he he's been doing it for 3 years now, but I guess this was probably a breakout season for him. I think this is his fourth year out of high school, but again, same thing as Makai Lemon in that he never had a season below 2 yards per route run, which I love to see, and the versatility, like you just said, he played out wide for the majority of the first two seasons he was playing for Indiana, and then all of a sudden he's converted into a slot receiver this year, where it seems like he was probably the most comfortable. Honestly, he did the best, obviously, in this season than he has any other year, but that could just come with experience as well. So the other, well, I don't want to bring him up right now. We'll talk about him later at the end of the draft. Like another guy that I might mix in here just because even Jeremy Bernard, as I was looking at this season, he's kind of regressed a little bit in my opinion from where he was last year. I know the yardage went up, but the efficiency did go down. So if I'm looking at this group right now, I'd probably put Casey Concepcion above all of them, just because of that stellar freshman season, and then this year was a nice bounce back and showed the versatility that he can be a deep ball guy. Then I'm probably going to put Omar Cooper and Surratt back to back, and then I'd go Jeremy Bernard if I'm just looking at those four out of that group there.
Yeah, and I don't really mind it. I won't really argue with anyone having any of those guys. I mean, that's the great thing about a tier is you're essentially saying like I feel similarly about these players, so I definitely won't argue with you there. Um, Honestly, like I want to move Omar Cooper Jr. up. Right now, he's being projected to be drafted in like the middle of the third, and not saying there's anything wrong with that. Like third is still a great pick. But like Surratt's being drafted in the end of the second. So it's kind of they're right now they're being projected to be drafted at 64 and 94. So you're basically talking about like a full round difference there between the two. What's hilarious is we were talking about Zachariah Branch before we jumped on here, and we were just laughing about how is he even going to the NFL? And I said, these these NFL draft guys that have been, all they do is they look at like 5 stars and yak ability and whatever, and they're gonna love them. Well, since Zachariah Branch or declared for the NFL draft, he's up to the 53rd overall player in. He's projected to be drafted 53rd overall, so that's absolutely hilarious. No, has nothing to do with my draft because you will not hear me say anything about Zachariah Branch, but I just noticed it on the website and thought that was hilarious. So back to the draft. That was tier three. Getting into tier four here, we have the draft capital and positional depth tier. And that just means this is where it starts getting ugly. Is essentially what it means. But really, it's the guys that are projected to get good draft capital or higher draft capital than I would maybe even say they should get, or positional depth for wide receivers, things like that, QBs. In a one QB league, there's only one QB we're going to talk about tonight. It's going to be Fernando Mendoza. I have him going at 110 here. And it's just we've talked about Mendoza. We'll talk about Mendoza a lot, especially when we're talking about super flex leagues and all that. But for a one QB league, I don't know if he has like the true upside to be a game changer, and that's all you're really looking for in a one QB. Obviously, in a one QB dynasty, you still have to have depth, and that's why I said this is your positional depth here. Okay, I need another QB to have. I can throw Fernando Mendoza. And honestly, like this is a one QB draft, but I'm doing the same thing in a super flex league where I have Mendoza as a Devy prospect that I drafted in an auction draft for $1 out of I think 1,000 or whatever it was. And I have Mendoza coming, and that doesn't like get me overly excited or anything. But at the same time, I'm probably losing Aaron Rodgers, maybe, maybe not. We'll see. And so that only leaves me with a couple of QBs. So at least I have Mendoza to throw in there as positional depth, and that's kind of how I'm looking at him. Not a player I'm overly excited about, but a player that can, is probably going to have 2 or 3 years at the very least to prove himself and all that kind of stuff. So a player that'll be just fine. Justice Haynes is a running back that we've talked about. I have him here at 109. He's a player that we've talked about for the past few years, completely underwhelmed at Alabama, moves over to Michigan and really becomes a different player. But ever since I came up with the Kenneth Walker comp, I cannot think of anything else. It reminds me so much of it. We see Kenneth Walker just run into the back of his lineman over and over again, lose 3 yards, and then boom, he gets 50. That is Justice Haynes in a nutshell. Really, not much of a receiving profile. Probably not going to be receiving back when it's all said and done. But man, he just flashes speed at times. Yeah, I'm sure he's going to be in a timeshare and everything. That's why I don't have him higher. 109 is a decent spot for him, but he can be a nice solid flex for you, and he'll have some big games, a la Kenneth Walker. Hopefully he doesn't go into a timeshare like Kenneth Walker, or as much of a timeshare, but I believe he will be in one type of timeshare, or in a timeshare, I should say. So, what do you think of 109 Justice Haynes, 110 Fernando Mendoza?
Yeah, Justice Haynes is very strange. Like 50% of his rushing yards are from breakaways, like 15-yard or more carries, which is great. But it's just it's exactly like Kenneth Walker. Like, what are you doing on the plays where you're not running for an 80-yard touchdown? Which awesome when those happen, but you can't really rely on that to happen every single game. Otherwise, you're just going to put up duds every now and again, especially once you get to the NFL. And I don't know. I feel like there's a misconception around Justice Haynes that he is a receiver. I don't know. I get that vibe from people that he's like this 3 down all around workhorse back, and he's just not a receiving back. He has never shown us to be that. He was not the best. Even while at Alabama, Jamarian Miller was the guy that they used on these receiving plays more often than not. Yes, he can catch the ball, but it's largely just screens. I think it might be entirely screens. His ADOT this year was -2 yards, so that just tells you that everything he's getting is behind the line of scrimmage. Great that he gets those opportunities, but it's just not in his game to be like this big time receiving back. So, but here we are again with like you've got Jeremiah Love at the top of the draft, and then you're like, who else is there? There's Jadarian Price. We liked Jonah Coleman for a time, and then he really fell off. That's a 4th-year player. The other thing too is Justice Haynes might not even be coming out in this draft. He hasn't made a decision one way or another. A lot of people say he might, but Michigan's making a strong push to try and get him back, and it's Michigan, so if they want him back, they'll pay him the money to get him to come back. Fernando Mendoza, yes, I was talking to John before the show started. I was like, I'm starting to really like Fernando Mendoza as a prospect. I think he's looking, and it's probably recency bias based on what we saw in the playoff game against Alabama, where he looked fantastic, and against Ohio State in the Big Ten championship, where he looked really good as well. He had a couple stinkers this year. That Penn State game that they almost blew. He saved himself with Omar Cooper catching that ridiculous touchdown in the last play of the game. But overall, like Mendoza's just been getting better from like a yards per attempt standpoint, from an ADOT standpoint. Like those numbers are shifting up as the season progresses. The QBR has always been good, so if he gets 101 draft capital, there's nothing that I'm gonna say is like blatantly obvious to where I could say like this guy's not going to be a franchise quarterback like we had with Will Levis, so he certainly has the tools to do it. If he goes 101, he will rightfully earn his spot as a top 5 pick in Superflex drafts. And here in these one QB drafts, where a lot of times you don't see QBs unless it's like a tier zero prospect. You don't see QBs go in the first round very often. But since there's like no one else to really pick from out of these skill positions, I think Mendoza's fine here at 110. And did you have Singleton in this tier, or is it just those two?
No, so I
Oh,
just
okay.
talked about the first two, but I also have Eric Singleton Jr. at 111 and Denzel Boston at 112. I just this is where I mean, like you want to start talking about it's getting ugly. We love Eric Singleton Jr. as a player. We're not the biggest Denzel Boston fans. And it's kind of the complete opposite. Things that are going on. Complete opposite scenario here for those two players. I love Singleton Jr. He's not projected to get the greatest draft capital, although he is creeping up. Just in the past few days, he's moved up 4 spots in the projected draft capital. So you see, ever since he declared, people are getting a little more excited about him, which is nice to see. Hopefully, the NFL will feel the same way. But then you have a player like Denzel Boston, who we don't really like, we don't really think is anything special, but yet he's projected to be drafted at like 25 overall, and it just blows my mind. How is this a first round player? I don't understand. In fact, I said his prospect profile is highly confusing. A player who was unproductive for 2 years and never hit 900 receiving yards would normally be dismissed by everyone. Yet the draft and Devy communities rate him highly. I see little upside and comp him to N'Keal Harry. Given his current projection for top 30 NFL draft capital, which I expect to fall, it's hard to drop him much lower than this right now. I do try to stick to my guns and stick to, Beth and all that. And you give me someone who's top 25 draft capital. I gotta have him up here at some point, especially in this class. But yeah, this is not a player that I'm overly excited about. And I would also expect, even if I have him at 112, someone else is going to have him at 105 or 106 or something like that. And he's already going to be gone anyway. So it's one of those players where, like, I can say technically I have him in my first round, but I would never, ever end up with any Denzel Boston.
Yeah, yeah, I feel the same way about Boston. I'll talk about Singleton real quick. So the Georgia Tech years were huge. I think we knew that he was going to be a star based on those two seasons, and then he goes to Auburn, and Jackson Arnold and company. Who is it? Who's it's not? Who is it? Hugh Freeze, who's a coach over there now, but just completely nuked him. Awful. ADOT dropped to below 7 this season. Uh, the yardage dropped like crazy. But then he went pro, and I feel like that he declared for the draft. I feel like somebody, an agent, and somebody said, "Hey, listen, NFL teams saw what you did at Georgia Tech. They know that this Auburn experiment was, maybe not your doing. They liked what they saw. We think you could still be a top, 84 pick in this draft or top 90 pick. You're going to be a day 2 guy." So if that's the case, then I like Eric Singleton because what he did in his first 2 seasons shouldn't be ignored. But Boston, what he did in his first 2 seasons was 66 yards. And then finally last year in 2024, he did have the 800-yard season, but didn't surpass two yards per route run. And that's the number I look for, and he didn't do it. He did do it this year, but I'm looking at. I get that you weigh in projected draft capital, but there's so many other guys that I would rather have here. I know you don't like Kenyon Sadiq. I think he's probably going to get the draft capital. He does hit the yards per route run metrics as a tight end. I know that the yardage wasn't great, but like what tight end did have a ton of yards this year aside from Eli Stowers, who I do like. But then if you're going to look in the same position, I like Jacoby Lane more than I like Denzel Boston. I like Chris Bell more than I like Denzel Boston, even with Chris Bell coming off an ACL injury. And then if you look at running backs, Jadarian Price, I would take him over Denzel Boston here. But I understand the process here. You're going with the whisperings of the so-called draft experts telling you that he's going to be a first-round draft pick. And if that's the case, then yeah, it makes sense here. But it would have to take like a lot of earth-shattering things for me to end up taking Denzel Boston the first round in any draft. I think it's more like the guys that I just mentioned, even if their draft capital is day two, day three, or not day three, but like let's say late day two, I'm still taking those guys over a first round Denzel Boston because I just don't see it with him.
Yeah, and obviously we don't have like height adjusted speed score, which I do throw in a Beth. I don't have that for these players right now, so that can change some stuff as well. Like we would expect Chris Bell would probably do pretty well on that, and Chris Bell is we're very close. He's the next player after Denzel Boston for me. So I, at least for wide receivers, in the wide receiver Beth. So I'm definitely not disagreeing with you. That's just the way that I have it. And honestly, I knew if I didn't have Denzel Boston there, it's gonna be for this article, it's where's Denzel Boston? What Denzel Boston's not in there? Where's Denzel Boston? So I just wanted to kind of throw him in there and just be like, hey, he's in here because of his draft capital, and that's it. So um, Denzel Boston 112. I will like once again. I'm not going to be drafting Denzel Boston, so that's not even where I have. It's kind of unbelievable to me. I have players to monitor, just like 4 or 5 names here in the article, and it's wild to me. Chris Bell tore his ACL very late in the season, and yet he's still projected to go, I think, 41st overall in the NFL draft right now. That kind of blows my mind. Like that's basically a player that's not going to be ready until what mid-season as a rookie. Like that just how would an NFL team put that much draft capital into a player that was definitely not anyone that we were like overly excited about. Obviously, he had a solid senior year and everything. I'm not trying to take too much away from him. I just said that he's the next player after Denzel Boston. I don't hate the guy, but I'm not like overly excited about him either. And then you throw in the ACL tear, the fact that he probably won't be 100% until his sophomore season. I really can't imagine that I would be overly excited about drafting him either. So that's kind of tough. And then you have Nicholas Singleton, and the hilarious thing is, I told you I did this rookie mock last year, this article last year. I had Nicholas Singleton in the rookie mock because we thought Singleton was coming out at this point last year. He kind of surprised everyone by staying in school. I literally did not change the line for what I put for Nicholas Singleton because there was no reason to. I said he has been a disappointment relative to expectations, but is easily one of the most athletic running backs in the class. And then I said, this is the same exact note I had for him last year. Like, how is that even possible? Like, nothing's changed. Yeah, he's overly athletic, but yet he's not a very good running back. But I think the NFL is going to fall in love with him when he goes and crushes the combine. Probably runs like a 4.39 or something like that, 40, and he's going to get drafted highly, and he's going to go to some team. And we're going to be like, oh, I guess we got to draft him now. So keep an eye on Singleton. Jadarian Price, we touched on him a little bit. I love Jadarian Price as a player. He just has no receiving profile whatsoever, a la Justice Haynes. I think he's a better running back than Justice Haynes, but I don't know if he's going to get the same draft capital as Haynes if Haynes comes out, and he just has no receiving profile, so it's really difficult. And then my boy Eric McAllister, he gets no love whatsoever. He's actually projected to be drafted at 207th overall right now and by NFL mock draft database. And I think that is going to drastically change. I think he will get drafted much higher than 207. I could be wrong, but I think he will. But honestly, like if you sit there and compare him and Quentin Johnston's college careers from the same school, mind you, and you just go look at their numbers, Eric McAllister's a better player. And yeah, I know that's not saying much because Quentin Johnston hasn't been an amazing player, but I think he's turned into a solid NFL wide receiver. Maybe not the fantasy stud that some people wanted him to be, but he's a solid NFL wide receiver. Well, I think Eric McAllister is Quentin Johnston, but with hands. So he can actually catch the ball. So, like, wouldn't you want that player? at least at some point in the second round, or if you can even get him in the third round, even better. But yeah, give me Eric McAllister. That's definitely going to be like my. I don't want to call him a sleeper because that's not a sleeper by any definition of the name, but he's going to be one of my favorite players that people are sleeping on. How about that?
That's fine. I'll talk about a few Senior Bowl guys that I think are going to get the Senior Bowl bump. Uh, kind of like R.J. Harvey. I think he was in the Senior Bowl last year, wasn't he? He was there. Um,
I honestly don't even remember. I don't pay attention to the running backs at all because they hardly do anything. Like because you can't hit them or anything like that. So they just kind of like,
yeah,
oh yeah, look, I would have scored a touchdown. I was like, no, you wouldn't have. There's like four people on the play.
yeah. Oh, the other guy that people are probably like, why hasn't anyone mentioned Emmett Johnson? Well,
Oh God,
you can go back and listen to a lot of our episodes on why we don't like Emmett Johnson. He's just not an efficient runner. He's just
no.
a guy that thrives on having a lot of volume in a really not a good offense even. But he's got a bunch of yards and a bunch of touchdowns and a bunch of catches, so it looks nice on a stat sheet. But as far as a running backs go, he's one of the not good ones in this class. A guy that I think could get a Senior Bowl bump is Mike Washington from Arkansas. Huge, 228, 6'2".
Mhm.
Unfortunately, he's like a sixth-year guy, so he has that going yet. But I think that's kind of like what R.J. Harvey had going on because he was super efficient too for UCF. Mike Washington had a really good season last year. The big-time run rate was over 10%, almost 1 yard per route run as a receiver. So he was kind of doing it all. So if you're looking for like an RJ Harvey light, that's even though he's much heavier, but that's who I would look for to kind of stand out in the Senior Bowl. And then from the wide receivers, I like Kevin Coleman, who had a really quiet season for Mississippi State in 2024, and I guess a similarly quiet season for Missouri this year. But another guy who, over 2 yards per route run, I know. But the market share has been good despite the yardage being down, especially at Mississippi State last year. He's a guy that the thing is like he's a pure slot receiver. So like if you're drafting him, just know like you're drafting him to be a slot guy who's gonna you're hoping to get 5 catches for 50 yards, something like that. So he's gonna be like deep in your flex positions if that's the type of league you're in. But certainly a guy that I'd be interested in like the late second or third round when it comes to rookie drafts. And then the tight ends that I talked about that I think are better than maybe the rest of this class just from like a top to bottom positionally. You've got Kenyon Sadiq, who I already mentioned, Eli Stowers already mentioned. I think Michael Trigg is an underrated guy. Um, Unless you're going back 2 years ago, then he was severely overrated. But now he's probably underrated. And then Tanner Kazile from Houston, another guy that maybe people weren't expecting to have the season that he did because he was coming from the MAC at Ball State. But then he showed up at Houston and I don't know this, but he probably led the team in receiving. So another good athletic tight end. So I think there's 4 or 5 tight ends that you could really feel comfortable taking in this draft class. Maybe more once it's all said and done.
Yeah, and we'll have plenty of time to get into the deeper names and everything. I really wanted to mostly focus on your top guys for today. Um, that's how I see it at least. That's what I put in the article. Obviously, like I said, things are going to change. Just in the past few days, Andy was talking about Emmett Johnson. Emmett Johnson's projected draft capitals dropped by 10 spots just in the past few days, and so that's what we like to see because we don't really like the player. And he was, being talked up as one of the best guys and ultimate stud and blah blah blah. And it's like, no, he just touched the ball a lot. And unfortunately, that was one of like the first lessons that I had to learn when creating Beth and Debbie Beth was with running backs. Uh, like actual production does not matter at all. Like you will not find uh total yardage or yards per carry or anything like that in Devi Beth or in Beth for running backs, because it does not matter. I don't care if you hit 5,000 yards in your career. You know, people talk about Nicholas Singleton broke the touchdown record for Penn State, and you know, like, we're all excited about that, except for he did it in 4 years, and he broke Saquon's record. Well, Saquon came out a year prior because he was a better player. So, you know, that's how that works, unfortunately. But yeah, we're gonna have so much time to get into these rookies and deep dive on players and everything. We just wanted to do a quick introduction to how we feel about the class. As you can tell, maybe not as excited as we've been in previous years, but as we get names solidified, we can start, and we start doing our deep dive, you know, transitioning from having to focus on setting lineups and doing all that to really deep diving and looking at these players. You know, we'll find our sleepers, we'll find our players that we do get excited about, and those players come every year. You know, obviously you're going to get your Senior Bowl bumps like Jack Besh got last year, and we can't say that Jack Besh did anything, but we know that those players are going to get Senior Bowl bumps. And there's players like Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper Jr., you know, and other names that we like going to the Senior Bowl, and hopefully we'll get that boost. And then we have players like Garrett Nussmeyer also going to the Senior Bowl, and they're going to, you know, get laughed out of the stadium. So we will we'll see a little bit of everything here, but it's going to be such a fun off season, and we are going to be here with you all the way, you know, talking, laughing, having fun, and just talking football, talking rookies, doing all that. If you guys have any rookies that you want us to deep dive on, if you want us to talk about in a future pod or anything like that, slide in the DMs. Let us know who's your favorite sleeper, who's your favorite. You know, we don't have to talk about the Makai Lemons anymore. We don't have to talk about Jordan Tyson too much more. But let's get into, you know, the sleepers, the lesser known guys. So let us know who you want us to talk about, who you think could just be that diamond in the rough or whatever else it might be, and we will talk about those players in the very near future. We're well over an hour already, so I'm not going to ask for words of wisdom from Andy. We will go ahead and get out of here. We will see you guys next time, but for now, we are cashing out.